Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Gabriel Axel Montes, and I'm grateful to be here today to have another chat with you. So, like the previous talks, just going to present for a little bit. Maybe some questions will come in. I might answer some along the way. Otherwise, we'll kind of get to questions and more interaction between you and all of us and me towards the end of the talk. So this is part of the centralized OS series. This one's on consciousness, which has a lot to do with, what I'm bringing to the table here in collaboration with SingularityNET. And the previous talks are definitely interesting on consciousness. Check them out if you haven't. The first one is on the evolutionary origins of the singularity, where I go into the cognitive neuroscience and neuroanthropology of basically how are we where we are now, how do we get here, and where are we going in terms of the technological singularity. Then the last talk I did some weeks ago has a bit more to do with consciousness, and we'll get a bit more into consciousness today and in the following weeks to varying degrees. So again, this is part of a decentralized OS series. Check out the other topics if you haven't, on finance and all sorts of things, and health. So stay attuned for those on the SingularityNET channel. Just like or subscribe, and you'll be notified in the future. So again, for those of you just joining, my name is Gabriel Axel Montes, and basically I'm a neuroscientist by training. I'm also an explorer of consciousness and an instructor in various consciousness methodologies and techniques. So I'm sharing a bit of that hybrid background of mine with you here in these talks, including today. So the subject of today's talk is breaking out of the simulation, or breaking out of the matrix. There's various ways to phrase this and talk about it. There is I'm going to share my slides with you in a moment. Yeah, here we go. And basically, the simulation is something that has been talked about in popular culture in many different ways. And it's essentially the idea that we are living in some sort of a video game. There's some various ways to characterize it, to talk about it. And the idea that we're living in a video game and it's being controlled by either some advanced version of us, or by some sort of more alien consciousness. So I'm kind of going out on a limb here to talk about actually what are cognitive neuroscience concepts, but through the lens of the singularity and kind of these more speculative concepts, such as a simulation. So we're kind of like sort of looking at these concepts that don't have to be talked about in terms of the simulation, but we're looking at them from the perspective of, hey, there's this big topic, the simulation. What is it? Is it real? How plausible is this? Just by looking at the way the human mind works. Okay, and I'm going to leverage a bit of what I did academically during my PhD in particular on how the brain interprets reality and perception, and how it perceives, how it updates its perceptions, how it can be kind of tricked into thinking something is real when maybe it's not as real as we would like it to be. So let's dive in. So the first thing we need to consider when we're thinking about, is there a simulation, or what is it, is the constraints of our biology. We call that, to use a computer analogy, we use the term wetware. So the term wetware basically is kind of like hardware, but referring to biology. So we have certain constraints in our body, in our brain, that shape and really they transform consciousness in a way that makes it very particular, the way we see things compared to other organisms, to other biological systems, other complex systems in the cosmos. So imagine the way we see things compared to the way the sun sees things, for example, and each according to his or her constraints. All right, so the human being has certain sense of constraints due to our wetware, and those basically can be more or less reduced to the neural hierarchy through which our senses are processed, filtered, and through which we use to basically take action in the world. So the first, I'll go through these very briefly. So in contrast to the idea that, you know, the brain is a magic soup that basically takes in input and spits out output somehow, there's actually some sort of order to the brain in terms of connectivity and the way that everything is connected that affect the processing of information. So the first level, the most basic level, imagine a pyramid, as you can see in the slides here. The most basic level are the raw senses. Okay, so the raw senses are basically what is happening, how is light hitting my eyes, how is tactile information hitting my skin, auditory information, so on and so forth. This also includes interoceptive or proprioceptive information that is essentially coming from the inside of the body through the actual sensory neurons that can actually sense and feel things there. So that's the first layer, and everything is just coming in through there. There's a ton of information coming in. Now, you may already be asking, but why are we not fully aware of the barrage of information that's coming through? Well, we'll get to that, and that has a lot to do with the subject of today's talk. The second layer is autonomic nervous system and coordination. So autonomic nervous system is basically the brainstem, the medulla, the pons, that are basically regulating the rate of heart rate, the rate of the heartbeats, the rate of breathing, and other functions, enteric functions deeper in the body. So in a sense, there's a lot going on there that's subterranean, so to speak. It's like underground, so you don't have to pay attention to it. So it doesn't take up your conscious real estate. There is a bunch of underground real estate, so to speak, to deal with that at an unconscious level. You can make that conscious, and you can help regulate and sort of biohack your body in different ways. But that is one layer that constrains our awareness, meaning there are certain organs, there are certain areas and regions of the brain and the way we're wired that enable us to feel certain things and also delimit what we can feel. They create boundaries around perception. The next rough layer up in the neural hierarchy is emotion, and that's in the limbic system, which is, if you look at the brain, use a handy model of the brain. This is your neural cord, your spinal cord, your body. This is your brain stem. This is your cortex. Well, in the middle of your cortex is basically here, in between your cortex and the brainstem is the limbic system right here where my thumb is. And the cortex wraps around that. The limbic system deals with emotion, with memory in the hippocampus, which is one of the highest parts of the brain in the hierarchy, in a sense, still is part of the limbic system, interestingly. So this is not a very linear hierarchy. It's just a rough functional hierarchy that has kind of like grayish, fuzzy boundaries. The limbic system has to do with, it's kind of the mammalian part of us that has to do with emotional expression, being attuned to the needs of others. It's very like this more social part of us, which is what really helped mammals to evolve and care for one another. And it also brought on the part of evolution in mammals that allows for extended youth, which is huge for neuroplasticity and development. So humans have a lot of that, which means we're in a very extended period of youth compared to other organisms, compared to reptiles, for example, which are more brainstem, which is like survival-based needs. Above emotion, you have cognition. Now, in a sense, everything is cognition, right? Everything is has cognitive information going through. Okay? And yet cognition classically has to do with judgment, decision making, things like that, linguistic sense, language. So things that are a bit more rational, things that have a bit more delineation to them. So that's the cognitive aspect, decisions, how is that happening? Yes, it is influenced by the emotions because each layer is influenced by the layers below it. So your cognition, your everyday decision making that you think is rational, even though it is a sort of order of complexity above emotion in the brain and in terms of processing, it is still very much conditioned because it's resting on this pyramid sort of structure. to use a pyramid analogy. Above cognition is metacognition. Metacognition means thinking about thinking, or cognizing about cognizing. So you're processing information about processing information. Again, metacognition has actually been found all along the spinal cord, all along the brain. It's not that your spinal cord is thinking about the senses it's perceiving. It's that it has a representation of the information it's perceiving. So there's a layer of abstraction, okay? So metacognition, though, on a conscious level, has to do with thinking about thinking. So when you're self-aware in some way, you're aware of your thinking processes, it's like a meta learning. If you become aware of how you learn, of how you operate, you can sort of get in a position to sort of get on top of yourself and kind of like change the process in some way, to some degree or another, depending. And the very top of the pyramid is the self-sense. The self-sense is basically when you say your name out loud to yourself. So if I say my name, Gabriel, what does it feel like to be me as an agent? So an agent is an abstraction layered on top of all these other layers that are constraining and constraining and constraining. And at the very top, we have our perception. In a sense, it's kind of like we're peeking our head above the canopy of all these layers below us, and we're looking around and we're saying, okay, there are other agents out there. So each layer can sort of recognize and deal with things that are like itself, right? So the self-sense is able to deal with ideas about itself and ideas about anything that looks like itself, which is others. So meaning the agent is like aware that it's an agent to some degree, and it looks at others and sees, oh, those are other agents. It infers. That's called theory of mind. The idea that you're aware that other beings like you have a mind of their own. And that's pretty important for human relationship, communication, dialogue, is to kind of put yourself in another person's shoes. That's probably quite important to the success of human civilization. If you think about it, perspective taking, and that's actually quite important also for developing consciousness and breaking out of any potential simulation. So the self-sense is this kind of peak that's built on top of everything. And all these layers build on top of each other, abstract on the previous layer, and they communicate both ways, hence the red arrow that you see on the pyramid there. So these are the constraints that are going to shape how we see reality. And they're also going to shape how we filter reality and even simulate it within ourselves in various ways. Okay? So here's a quote from a chapter I wrote in a book. Our self-sense is the distilled product of all nervous system activity. Even without our knowing it, the self-sense contains the information necessary in order for us to live and interact with others in the world. The final indicator of the quality of our experience is how it affects our sense of self. So I have an image of a volcano here because the neural hierarchy is a bit like a volcano in a sense. You have these subterranean layers, they build up. There's kind of an upward movement, right? So the things that come in through the senses kind of push their way up to be recognized by the higher levels of the brain when they need to be. And there's a bidirectional communication up the hierarchy. And at the very top, I liken the self-sense to the actual mouth of the volcano and what comes out of it. It's the self-sense is the product of everything that comes below it and pushes it upward. And it meets everything outside of your biology. So your experience is like a virtual reality of your brain and of basically everything that's happening inside your biology, all your perception. Your self-sense is the sort of interface between the layers in your neural hierarchy and all of your biology, with the interface of all that with the outside world, everything outside of you. So everything within your skull or within your body and everything beyond. So your first person experience is like a virtual reality of what's happening inside of you. And that's what you use to meet everything. Your self-sense helps you relate with things beyond the actual neural signals it wouldn't be very useful for you to think about beating your heart consciously or breathing consciously or focusing 100% of your attention on moving your left foot forward or your right foot forward when you have to walk. Human civilization would collapse instantly. So thanks to the sophisticated mechanisms of evolution at a micro level and at a macro level, we're able to do much more than that, and we're able to communicate with others. We're also able to think about things symbolically. We're able to look at the stars. The volcano analogy here is also useful for that, especially this one with the lightning, which I intentionally used the volcano with lightning. Do yourself a favor and later search on the internet for images of volcanoes of lightning, and there you get all sorts of really nice images. So the lightning, you can imagine, is sort of like an extended nervous system, right? A nervous system is just a conduction of electrical signals along biological gradients of salt, right? Sodium and other chemicals and compounds. And so the lightning is sort of a metaphor for the communication that we have through our conscious mind, through our sort of quote unquote extended nervous system, right? Through the ions in the air, perhaps there's maybe some conduction of signal that we can't perceive that connects us with everything around us. Not only can we see things from far away, but the photons coming in and out of our eyes are basically interacting with the world around us, and it's our interface, and it's a really important interface. And everything that the self-sense is perceiving, again, this is another key point that we're kind of hinting at this whole time. Everything that the self-sense is perceiving is going to be conditioned by the subterranean or the internal layers of our biology. We're not built to perceive everything by default, let's say, because we've had millions of years of evolution constraining us towards being aware of three-dimensional reality around us to survive, to pick up things, to move, to go pick fruit in the forest, bring it back for our family and our tribe. So we have these recurring loops that are reinforcing our physical sustenance, survival, existence, and care of those in our tribe or our species. So the next thing is to think about how this hierarchy works. How do these layers communicate with one another, and how are the layers communicating within themselves? So that's where we enter with predictive processing. Predictive processing, before we get into the actual bullet points here and all that, predictive processing is essentially the idea that the brain is constantly projecting onto perception of the present by using its past experience. Meaning, past experience has filled sort of the brain, let's say, with information, and the only way we can interpret the present based on our biological habit of the way our biology works is to keep using past information to interpret the present. Okay, so in a sense, we're always building models of reality. Always. You're taking past information, all the positive, all the negative, all the traumas, all the ups and downs of your entire life. They have been digested into your nervous system, into your brain, into your biology, crystallized, so to speak, into certain thought forms and emotions. And you use that at a subconscious level, at an unconscious level, to interpret reality in front of you, okay, for better or for worse. So if you look at this little image here, you can see this little model. You can see that mental states essentially are going to always be predicting the inputs from below. And if you look all the way at the bottom of this diagram, you see muscles and senses. So on the left hand of the diagram, you have these predictions that are essentially predicting the information coming in. And in a sense, the muscles will sort of output whatever needs to be output according to the past predictions. So, and then here you have the prediction error, which is kind of going up on the right side, which is essentially saying, if the senses meet. So when you have a sensory input coming into the hierarchy, if we go back to our pyramid, from the raw senses, if you have something coming up that doesn't match what the past experience tells you, then the senses will basically try to or the neural hierarchy at the various levels will try to correct for that input and basically shoot back down the hierarchy a motor command of some sort. Now, people have academics have worked this out in different ways. Some people think that the predictions are going up and the prediction errors are going down. Other people think vice versa. There's different ways of looking at this, but in a sense, you can look at action as a sort of correction of the prediction error. So think about it this way: if you've been in a situation, any given situation, many times in your life, and you're encountering it again, like getting in the car and driving, going to work or going to run an errand, you are not going to be thinking about it too much because the layers in your neural hierarchy already have the information to be able to process this unconsciously. So you can sort of pay attention to something else. You can listen to a podcast or to the radio or whatnot without thinking about every single detail about being in the car, etc. And even your knowledge of driving gives you some experience to subconsciously perceive threats. So when vehicles break the rules on the road, you can all of a sudden jump into conscious attention. So that's an example of a prediction error, meaning your brain from the top down is always predicting that reality is going to present itself as it has before. So you're like, yeah, everything's fine on the road. But as soon as a car deviates, like another car on the road deviates, and the perception of that through your vision or sound, if it's like a screeching tire, will be registered in your neural hierarchy as unusual. And then it'll make its way up closer to your conscious awareness. And then from there, you will have another kind of reflex that is more than just changing lanes, but a reflex of getting away from this car that's kind of broken a rule. And that's an example of basically your brain sending predictions, expecting how things is going to be down the hierarchy, right? Down this, using this model on the left-hand side there. And then if there's an error, meaning if a car on the road is doing something it's not supposed to, it'll send a prediction error, meaning there was a prediction that didn't meet the sensory input. That's an error. It's like, oh, the model failed in that instance. Your brain's model of reality failed. And then it has to enact a separate action. Now, this is here to help us survive. This is here to help make reality more efficient, right? So we don't have to think about everything that we've experienced before. We can free up mental real estate for thinking about other things. The sort of downside of this is that it basically is going to lean us, like kind of push us in the direction of forming habits. So the double-edged sword here is that you're going to tend as a human being to, as an organism really, to treat reality the same more and more. And here's a trick: if your predictive model that's going from the top downwards can make reality fit into its model without paying attention to the subtle differences that could be useful for, say, enjoying the present moment or thinking about a new way of doing something. If your model overfits reality to the model, you actually will be overestimating how much your perception fits according to your habit, and you'll just keep habitually repeating yourself in a loop in life, right? So you can sort of like lock yourself in. You can lock yourself in. So I wrote here phantom limbs because an example of this in the body is when someone loses a limb. They have phantom limb syndrome, which is essentially, not everyone does, but many people do, where they keep perceiving like kind of like the energy field of their limb in space. And they think they have an arm, or sometimes they'll have an impression that their arm is there, but it's actually not physically there. It's just there at a very subtle level because the brain has been predicting for so many years that the limb is going to be there, that all of a sudden when it becomes amputated or you lose it, that the brain has a lot of trouble letting go of that constant prediction. And the prediction error of the arm not being there isn't quite yet as strong as all the years of predicting that the arm was going to be there. So it takes a while. So you have the present moment. Your predictive processing is always interpreting the present according to the past, is reinterpreting the past according to the present, and is constantly projecting its models based on the past into the future. That's a bit of a mind bender there, but essentially your brain is always making simulations. Your brain is always simulating experience based upon the past. So the organism's goal when it's interacting with its environment is to reduce uncertainty in a sense. You're maintaining habit. So you have yourself, which basically becomes molded according to experience, and you start to separate self from environment because you gain more information about who you are over the course of your life, etc. And then over time, you kind of say, I'm going to reduce uncertainty to help myself survive, right? This is why sometimes, for example, as people get older, maybe they become a bit more risk averse. You kind of start to kind of create more little boundaries between yourself and the world. And maybe you have kids you want to raise and you say, well, I'm not going to take that risk. I'm not going to go skydiving this time like I did when I was earlier in my life. When people are actually wearing virtual reality goggles, they'll often get reality sickness. VR sickness, not reality sickness, because they start to feel that their body is not quite where the visual presentation is. The video game in the VR is telling them they're somewhere else, but they can feel they're not. They'll have that jarring misperception, and the brain is like trying to correct this prediction error, but it can't, because it's like it can't fully realign it and fix it. So it kind of gets sick, and it kind of tells you, well, whatever you got to do, you got to stop. This happens when you're on a boat sometimes. You get seasickness. So we can get reality sickness sometimes as well, which is when we're kind of perceive something's off, but we don't exactly know what to do about it. And we kind of get stuck, and then we go to therapy and all this sort of thing. So there's a delicate balance here between order and chaos. You can maintain order by keeping those predictions in line. And then there's a chaos out there that you're kind of trying to wall out and kind of keep yourself walled out from, or walled in from. And so there's a bit of a balance there that to be struck, right? If you have too much order, you kind of don't grow and you kind of siphon creativity. If you have too much chaos, you may actually lose your ability to take care of yourself. But one of the things is that in each layer, in each expectation, in each prediction, in each attempt to reduce surprise, there is a simulation of what things are supposed to be like, based upon your own model. And in a sense, you're not really always perceiving things as they really are in that very moment. You're perceiving things as they are in terms of their likeness to your past experience. And only when something breaks the pattern strongly enough will it be brought to your attention. Like, whoa, what happened? Like, this is not, I didn't expect this, So there's a simulacra is a imitation of something. Think about it in terms of also, if you look as far back as religion, the worshiping of idols or idolatry, right? It's like a religion in a sense kind of erects these structures and sculptures and artwork and institutions that are supposed to kind of like help the person, help the culture remember what it was worshiping in the first place. But then over time, people forget what they were worshiping, which is kind of supposed to be this, the infinity of the inner self and the infinite creative potential of the mind, and they forget. And the institutions slowly, over the course of generations, especially generations that don't remember the original point of, inner ecstasy, they start to replace that, and they are simulacra, they're imitations of the original thing. And over the course of time, you kind of just become ingrained in following rote rituals without realizing what it is that you're even doing in the first place. I'm just going to scroll through these questions here because I think some people have some ideas, and I've been kind of focused on the presentation for a bit. So, loving the info, cool. I have reality sickness. I'm used more than VR already. Spending a lot of time in VR. Yeah, there are some tricks to getting out of VR sickness. So continuing here. So another aspect of predictive processing is called the free energy principle. Free energy is kind of another way of talking about entropy, so to speak, to simplify it, or surprise. Free energy is kind of like something that is associated with the chaos that I mentioned earlier. And your models are trying to kind of control the amount of chaos that you perceive. So they build a model that you can sustain. So the brain becomes a statistical model of the world that it inhabits. The brain, what the brain is doing is inferring the causes, the external causes of the input it's receiving. So the brain isn't necessarily purely dealing with the inputs. It's dealing with predictions about what is the cause of this input. And as long as the cause is parsimonious with this model, it doesn't need to really look at the input further, right? So in a sense, when you have an original experience, the first time you taste, chocolate, or the first time you do anything in life, that experience tends to be kind of the most impactful because it's the original information download, so to speak. And then after that, your brain is always going to have this model of what that was like. And it's going to be using the model or the simulacrum or the simulation of that thing. So it does this in order to maintain homeostasis, to survive, and to maintain stability. And again, it's that tension between order and chaos. This image here is essentially how the free energy principle applies to movement. So every time you move, what's actually happening is that your brain, for example, here's a movement arc, a movement trajectory for an arm that's reaching from point A, which is the red ball, to point B, which is the green point. It's like a target, right? So you just imagine your arm is still on your desk and then you want to move it to reach for the cup. What happens there is actually that you're somewhere in your biology, maybe your autonomic nervous system, or maybe your cognitive or emotional, you have a feeling of, oh, I'm thirsty or I'm hungry. So your brain will say, will notice that in the cup next to you is a drink, and it'll kind of say, okay, all these subconscious processes happen saying, for me to satisfy my hunger or satiate my hunger, I need to reach for the object and put it in, or I need to actually to put it more simply and actually maybe more accurately, is the brain says, for me to satiate hunger, I need to have eaten. And then after that, the brain realizes, well, I'm hungry, so I haven't eaten. And in order to eat, I need to have something in my belly. In order to have something in my belly, it needs to first go in through my mouth. In order to go in through my mouth, I need to put it in my mouth. In order to put it in my mouth, I need to actually have it in my hand. In order to have it in my hand, I have to get it into my hand. In order to do that, I need to actually reach for it. Okay? So if your hand is here on your desk and your brain has a signal of I'm hungry, it's going to translate all that into saying, right now, the cup is not in my hand. The prediction is that the cup is in my hand, but the prediction there's an error. Meaning, when my brain says cup in hand, and it's actually reading the senses from the hand at the same time, the senses are saying there is no cup in hand. So the brain will go through this rapid process of trying to reconcile and correct that error. And that error correction is represented by the hand reaching for the object, okay? And there's like an invisible rubber band between the hand where it is and the object. And so you can imagine like an invisible pull towards the object. That invisible pull is a process of correcting prediction errors. So that process of reconciliation is how we bring sort of chaos into order. And but we're also seeing the world through our lenses and according to our needs. You wouldn't have lifted your arm if you didn't need to satiate your hunger. Okay, so there's an entire field of cognitive science and looking in neuroscience using the free energy principle, predictive processing. The point of this for today's talk is that your brain is constantly creating simulations of reality. It is not necessarily looking at reality on its own terms. It's looking at reality in terms of the needs of the organism. So it's constantly filtering, constantly reinterpreting. So somebody wrote here in the Q&A, thoughts on psychedelics? Yeah, well, I think we talked a little bit about this in the last talk. Psychedelics temporarily break the order and turn it into chaos by basically telling your thalamus and your brain, stop gating information, allow information to come in. So you're kind of opening floodgates. It kind of helps you to sort of like see beyond the predictions. It allows more prediction errors to come in and for you to just kind of like witness it and enjoy it and hopefully not react to it too much. Not trying to control everything that you're experiencing, rather just let yourself enjoy the experience. Psychedelics are, there's a whole now a new field of psychedelic science opening up, demonstrating how psychedelics can help sort of change the way predictive processing works in the way I just described. In terms of the practical use of psychedelics, as I've said before in previous talks and other places, other avenues, is to mind the set and the setting, right? So if you have a chance to kind of like set a few parameters before you begin, that's always more ideal than just kind of like doing it haphazardly, completely. Depends on kind of your experience and your approach. I generally don't explicitly promote psychedelics because you never know what the individual condition is of the person taking it. But that being said, you know, there's definitely a place for them. They could be a very effective occasional eye-opener. I'm more of an advocate for doing these things using your own mind. I think psychedelics could be kind of show you what's possible, and then sort of it's up to you to sort of walk through the door instead of keep opening and closing the door repeatedly. And when you can do it yourself, you build up the endogenous ability to kind of shift into those states. You know, for me personally, I feel like my experience is essentially kind of in a permanently psychedelic state of sorts. A lot due in part to the cultivation that I've done in my life. You know, consciousness cultivation through different practices and methods, and seeing life as kind of a virtual reality where you can experience different modes of perception. And you can do that in a very controlled and effective way, and then, you know, develop all sorts of new cool awarenesses. So yeah, looking at the questions here. How do neuroeconomics and cybernetics relate to self-actualization in terms of our brain's ability to visualize its way through the simulation? It automatically generates for itself. That's a big kind of like complex question. Self-actualization is sort of the meat of you know, the meat and bones of all this. So like, we're not talking about the simulation in the end to kind of do nothing about it. We're setting the stage here for how to actually do something about this. And that's kind of like where I want to take this talk a little bit. So if you allow me to kind of go on, and we'll get to that. So part of the point is that reality has always been virtual. And if you look up the definition of virtual, basically it means in a virtual manner, in efficacy or effect only, and not actually, to all intents and purposes, practically, in essence, but fact. So virtual, when someone says, oh, virtually all of reality is virtual, or virtually, virtually all instances of X are this, you know, basically what they're saying is that they're not necessarily trying to align all the little minutia of the point. They're just trying to, in a sense, say, in effect, or the main point, the essence of something, you know? And I use the image of the Russian dolls here because the predictive processing hierarchy is constantly simulating itself, all the different layers. It's like Russian dolls, there's one inside of another, and it's all the way up and all the way down in the end. So you can say that there are many kinds of simulations, right? Where do the simulations begin and where do they end? So a lot of folks like to think about simulations in terms of there are aliens controlling or advanced versions of ourselves in another dimension that are orchestrating a video game for us to play. The way I view that in general, and this is certainly up for you know, discussion, is the simulation the simulation hypothesis is very similar to what a lot of religions and wisdom traditions have said for a very long time. That there are bigger forces at work, that reality is an illusion, and so on and so forth. And that the notion that it has to do with an advanced civilization, you know, simulating us or creating a simulation for us to play in like a video game. Some of the most cutting edge human thoughts has a lot to do with, you know, using the analogies and the metaphors that are available at the time. So in a sense, the idea is, in a sense, just us, I think, is a secular age kind of acknowledging the inner mythology of consciousness that has always been there in the terms of religion and for a very long time, but it's kind of using it in a more scientific or sci-fi kind of way. So is it another civilization doing it to us, or is it us doing it to ourselves, is kind of a question that is challenging to answer. But I think in terms of the alien part, there's a lot of focus on the idea of aliens being this external thing far away that's very anthropomorphized, things outside of our solar system being human-like or functioning in similar ways. If we leave the whole idea of like UFOs aside for a moment, an advanced civilization, to assume that it's anthropomorphic like us is a pretty big bias. That's the height of predictive processing. It's like, oh, there's something out there, it must be like us, because we're projecting ourselves onto those things. If you break out of that, then kind of the logical sort of conclusion is that aliens have psychical technology, that they don't have to necessarily travel to Earth, and we don't have to travel to them. They are already interacting with us in the mind in various ways, or they could be in different people, you know, different depending on, you know, your consciousness, your biology. If you just do the logical experiment, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that is a logical sort of hypothesis generation. If you take away the anthropomorphic bias, they're probably interacting with our mind, and they're camouflaged. We don't see it because our brain has so many constraints that it can only see things a certain way, you know, in normal, ordinary consciousness, that it wouldn't even see these things actually there. So, you know, we don't have to go so far to look for these things. If we want to see them, maybe we have to open our minds in a certain way and kind of learn how to perceive things that are not us. So then you have to develop your sense of your sovereign boundaries to be able to tell what is not you, and where does you start and where do these other things begin. Someone is saying they haven't seen my diagrams. Can everybody see the screen share that's happening right now? I'll look at the questions, but okay. Maybe it wasn't there. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna go back a little bit because maybe it wasn't there.
Should work now.
Okay, so let's go back. If you haven't seen my diagrams, I'm gonna show you real quick. I mean, the concepts are already there. I usually don't like to use visuals that much because, you know, they kind of be distracting, but I did use them this time, and so it's not a problem if you only heard me this whole time. So we have constraints that go along the neural hierarchy, from our raw senses to autonomic nervous system to emotion to cognition, metacognition, and self-sense. The volcano is a self-sense where basically our underlying biology interacts with the environment around us. The lightning is a metaphor for kind of the extended nervous system where the self-sense interacts with all of reality and reaches for the stars, so to speak, is able to use symbolic consciousness. Predictive processing, you have on the left side of this diagram here, the predictions that go down from the top of the hierarchy down to the bottom. And if the predictions break, if the senses or if there's information coming in that breaks the predictions, there will be a prediction error that gets shot up the hierarchy, and then the hierarchy will generate a new prediction. So the key there is that you can either in a sense fit reality to your models constantly, or you can adapt your model to reality, right? And we're always in a tug of war with that, in a sense. There's always a goal to reduce uncertainty, to maintain habit, and the present. We're always projecting the past and the future. We're always projecting the past to interpret the present, and we're kind of anticipating the future constantly based on the past. And that's great because we can, in a sense, build things by anticipating. We can better survive. We can take our ideas and put them forward, build new things, anticipate the future, plan. But we have to manage these things. We have to manage them in different ways. There are certain things maybe we should plan for, and other things that maybe we can let go and be more creative. So it's a balance between order and chaos. And we're always simulating things based upon our past experience. Now, it's kind of good that we're able to recap all this with the diagrams. So free energy principles and another form of predictive processing. Here's a movement arc. This is an article by Dr. Carl Friston. You can look up his theories. There's a 2010 article in Nature called The Free Energy Principle, a Unified Brain Theory. It explains everything for all you guys and folks that want to explore all this from a more technical perspective. So this is done in order to maintain order and stability, again, survival, to help the species kind of maintain itself, to help our mental model not break into complete chaos. So reality has always been virtual, and there's the the Russian doll analogy. So virtual, and this means in essence, right? So in a sense, if we are, the point here is that there may have never been some objective reality that we're perceiving, and even now when we have virtual reality through goggles, we're calling it virtual. And at the same time, reality, that what we've always called reality, has in a sense been our virtual interpretation of it through these predictive processing mechanisms. So maybe we can recalibrate what we talk about. We can talk about our perception, our model, and we can talk about reality as this kind of receding horizon that we can always kind of work to become more objective, to see reality as it is. No single person has a lockdown on what reality is. To get closer and closer to perceiving reality, you can basically become more decentralized in your consciousness. You can decentralize perception so that you're more and more non-local, meaning you're inferring what it's like to look at things from other people's perspectives, from other cultures' perspectives, from other planets, all that sort of stuff, right? What do things look like from the different vantage points in the cosmos? So now, layers of simulacra. I mentioned this in the nervous system. There are layers in the nervous system. But if we go back to the volcano, there are things outside the volcano, meaning there are things outside of our perception. So what's inside the volcano is subconscious and unconscious. What's at the tip of the volcano is conscious. What is beyond the volcano is supraconscious. Okay, we can be conscious of what we're capable of perceiving, but there are other things that are above our consciousness that we're not always fully perceiving for various reasons, meaning we're not always perceiving what's happening in every corner of our culture or our environment. We're constantly we're constantly looking at things from the perspective of the self. Why? Because we have gone through thousands of years and millions of years of evolution looking out after our own physical survival. So that's why we're predicting things according to our past experience, so we can maintain our survival, which is a design feature, and it's a design flaw. If you want, you can look at it like the human species can go as long as it shall due to this amazing feature to plan and base things upon the past experience and learn. Human civilization may also become extinct because of the double-edged sword of this. We may not be able to go out far enough. So what are we missing? What are we not seeing? And sometimes we think we're seeing things or perceiving things, but there are also projections, right? Yes, the stream will be recorded. Somebody says there are that many realities as there are humans on Earth. In a sense, yes, there are as many paths and perspectives as there are humans on Earth, for sure. And kind of, as I say, perceived realities definitely as well. A sort of objective reality may never be possible. However, you can become as aperspectival as possible. You can reduce the number of the amount that you depend on taking perspective. You can kind of establish on like a knowledge base of non-local knowledge and kind of have a zero perspective vantage point. So in the presentation here, layers of simulacra. There's the self, right? So we're simulating ourselves all the time. there is the self, but we're also simulating it. There is the environment around the body, which there is, and yet we're simulating it, right? Because we're not always thinking about what book is on the shelf, what is over there, what's there, is the dog in the kitchen, et cetera, et cetera. We are simulating what we think the environment is based upon our past perception. Also the culture, our ability to know the culture and be a part of it is based on a simulation of what we think is going on. Now, there is also something that I want to say here. Now, if you see what I'm writing here, self, environment, culture, civilization, planet, cosmos, we're increasing the scales. If you look at like a concentric kind of donut diagram with different layers of orbits, the self is kind of in the middle, in the center, and inside the self there's like atoms and organs and quarks and all that sort of stuff. Outside the self there's the, you know, the by self, I don't mean self of consciousness, I mean the ego, personality, bodily, embodied self. Beyond that, there's the environment, then the culture, civilization. Now, each one wants to control what's inside of it and what's outside of it. It wants to predict what's outside of it and kind of control it and shape it. The same way that the self, the body, shapes the environment. You know, it moves things around in the environment. It moves a stick from here to there, it moves a fruit from there to there. We architect our environment constantly, but the self is also regulating what's happening inside of it according to its needs. The environment is going to regulate the self. The culture is going to regulate the environment. Civilization as a whole is going to regulate the cultures and the subcultures in it. The planet, to some degree, is going to regulate the civilizations, and the civilizations will have an effect on the planet as well, right? Fossil fuel burning will have an effect. Digging metals and gems out of the ground, stones out of the ground, will have an effect on the planet. And the cosmos itself has an effect on the planet, right? So, in a sense, the culture also has its own sort of morphic field, its own series of habits that are produced by the aggregate influence of all the individuals in it, and that culture will try to influence the individuals within it. Just as the civilization will influence all the subcultures within it. And the cultures will evolve according to the civilization. The civilization will evolve according to the aggregate influence of all the subcultures. The planet, you know, the Gaia as a biological system doesn't include the noosphere, or the realm of the ideas based upon the people's sort of aggregate mental kind of realm. So the planet is what it is. The trees may not be affected by the thoughts of somebody on the other end of the planet. But the planetary consciousness, meaning all of human civilization on the planet, all the species, is affected by that behavior of the civilizations. And the planet will do what it can to influence the civilizations, whether it's a deliberate thing or not. Meaning, if there are enough, maybe if there's enough sea level rise, or if there's enough volcanic eruptions, it'll influence the behavior of the people on the planet. And the cosmos will affect things as well. There are certain patterns in the solar system that are set the way they are because of the early evolution of the solar system, which has to do with the evolution of the cosmos around it earlier on. So these are nested systems that influence each other, and in a sense, they are representing each other to the adjacent systems. Meaning, the environment is representing itself to the self and to the culture, and so on and so forth on all these layers, according to how those other layers need to perceive it. Meaning, your liver does not need to understand what's happening in your thoughts. It's like if you follow the stock market, your liver doesn't need to know about the stock market. It'll influence the way you feel because all the organs have associated emotions. Even still, the biology of your liver and your heart will influence the way you feel and think. But your liver doesn't need to be aware of the charts of where, you know, different cryptocurrencies are. And since we're on a cryptocurrency channel here, your liver doesn't need to be aware of that at a conscious level. It just needs to be, it'll be influenced by it, and it'll influence your conscious perception. Now, the same thing, the culture will be influenced by all the individuals in it, and it will influence the selves in it. So in a sense, all these different layers have these effects, but the way that the individual perceives a culture is through a simulation. Because the reason it's a simulation is because of predictive processing. And because those impressions that the individual has to form ideas about the culture, those impressions are, in a sense, based on recordings of what the individual perceives at a given point about the culture. You might go periods of your life without reading the news, without listening to music. So you have certain impressions about what the culture is, and you may have missed entire movements, civil rights movements, music genre developments and evolutions. You may have been outside of the cryptocurrency market for like a year and kind of missed what happened, in the evolution of Ethereum, of Bitcoin, and this and that. So you have certain ideas about things. You don't have the full picture. I'm kind of beating the point here because it's important to understand that when we think about things, we're basing our calculations on imitations. Now, on the right-hand side of this slide here, I have a mandala. Okay. Now, mandala is a word for like that signifies kind of a visual pattern that represents a informational pattern in the cultural mind of the culture that created it. So here we have a mandala, and usually in the center of a mandala, you have kind of an icon or a symbol that's important to focus on. And you focus your vision on that, and then the peripheral vision will kind of pick up on the other information around it. Usually there are layers, so you have a central figure or a central point, a dot, and around it you have these concentric kind of opening embellishments, flout, and then there is like gates. So you have 4 gates, kind of like the north, south, east, west, the gates of perception, and in a sense, it's the way that the thing in the middle relates to the world outside of it, outside the castle walls, perhaps. And outside of it, you can see different figurines. Maybe you can see like different, maybe beings or different patterns that represent things in the culture. So this forms a pattern that the thing in the middle is interacting with on the things outside of it. And the things outside of it have certain ways to access the thing in the middle. So these are layers of simulacra. So the thing in the middle can be of the things outside of it. The chances are it has very small impressions of it, right? So where somebody wrote in the comments, you are the center of the mandala, Dr. Terence McKenna. Good old Terence McKenna. Yeah, wherever your singularity of experiences, wherever your what people call your bindu of experience, your drishti of focus, that's kind of the center of the mandala. You can create mini mandalas all the time, because your central vision will be on one thing, your peripheral vision will be on other things, and your peripheral vision isn't only about vision, it's about the way your brain is wired. There are certain things you focus on, there are certain things that you don't focus on, but that influence the way you perceive whatever is in the middle. So coming along here, we don't need to get too deep into this, but this is pretty helpful to be aware of, is the all quadrants, all lines, the AQAL, AQAL map, the integral map, which was developed first by Ken Wilber and has continued to evolve. What happens here is that there are ideas of what are called holons. Basically, the holons are kind of nested layers of kind of self-contained complex systems. So an atom is a holon, a molecule is a holon. The organs, the tissues are holons that are superordinate to the atoms and the things underneath it. And sort of the neocortex is another holon on top of the limbic system, and so on and so forth. And then, so if you look at this map here, this is pretty simple but complex at the same time. So you have different domains of knowledge. Basically, the upper left here is the interior individual. Just focus on that quadrant for a second without looking at the others, if you don't mind. Just to help understand it more easily. That is the world of your how things feel to you, right? So you look at emotion, you have impulse, you have perception, sensation. There are concepts, there are rules that you operate by, etc., and so on and so forth. So this is the internal world of the I, and it's kind of like the interior dimension of the individual organism. On the upper right quadrant, you have the exterior individual, which is kind of the behavioral aspect. So yeah, you do have emotion. If you look at number 8 on the upper left quadrant, there's emotion. If you look at number 8 on the upper right quadrant, you have the limbic system. So that's the exterior dimension, the exterior sort of like side of the coin, okay? And that's the it. So when we talk about objective systems, we look at things we can observe. We can observe the limbic system through an fMRI scan, through a cross-section of the brain. We can observe atoms and so on and so forth using different techniques and microscopes and different scientific instrumentation. So that is the it. That's the objective world, the exterior of an individual. The lower half is the plural. So the upper half of this diagram is the singular, right? The interior individual and the exterior individual, I and it. Now, the lower half of this map is the we on the lower left, which is cultural. It's the interior dimension of the collective, okay? So you have, if you look down like at, 9 through 13, you basically have different modes of cognition that you have in culture. You have magic thinking in a culture, mythic cultures, rational cultures, and then beyond that you have centauric or integral. So magical cultures are kind of, you think about like, Celtic, kind of like magic fairy world. Then beyond that you have mythic, which is like empires, us versus them. We have a giant myth and we're going to impose that upon other societies and we're going to overtake them. So it's a very us versus them. Then rational is kind of like, think the scientific enlightenment. Indeed, if you look at the lower right quadrant, which is the exterior collective or the social, number 12 is the Industrial Revolution. And that is, the beginning of kind of a more rational wave of consciousness. If you look before that, mythic cultures are associated with agrarian modes of production. If you look at number 10, on the lower left is magic, on the lower right is horticultural. So the modes of production influence the interior dimension on the corresponding lower left quadrant. So you have the we. So when you think about, the we of a culture, that's the interior dimension. And the it's is the collective systems, the systems theories. That's kind of like, for example, postmodernism is really great at analyzing that. All the theories of Karl Marx were basically kind of looking at how the lower right determines the lower left, and how to break that, how to create a revolution that breaks people out of that, and so on and so forth. So now all the numbers here roughly correspond to all the others. So if you pick a number, if you look at, let's say, number 3, irritability corresponds with prokaryotes. So prokaryotes are these very basic cellular organisms that when you poke them, they get irritated. You can see them react. And that's the level of complexity that they have. Number 3 on the lower left is protoplasm, right? So basically, it's kind of like the interior culture of a bunch of cells is protoplasmic. And then on the lower right, you have the Gaia system, which is kind of like a primordial soup of just the basic cells. If you were to draw like a circle between all the threes, that is a holon. And you have holons underneath that are subordinate to that go to prehension at the level of atoms and galaxies. And then you have holons that are superordinate to that, which are basically like the neural cord, the limbic system, the neocortex, so on and so forth, and maybe some other things that we don't understand yet, 11, 12, and 13. Just to make a comment here, 11, 12, and 13 on the upper right, actually, let's go beyond 11, 12, and 13 because 11, 12, and 13 are already mapped to the other layers. Beyond the neocortex, somewhere beyond that, could be hybrid systems where you have brain-computer interfaces, right? That maybe our cognition will expand when we interact with complex systems with complex computers through neural interfaces and so on and so forth, or just cyborg biohybrid amendments to our biology. So the holons thing, in a sense, any holon is going to be predicting the holon beyond it to some degree or other, and it's going to have a very faint impression of it, and eventually the world will keep sending that holon prediction errors until the holon evolves to the next one. And that might be through evolution, through it could take millions of years to do that properly. And mutations will be the quote unquote sort of random sort of mechanism through which those things happen. And those mutations won't be purely random. They'll be random according to the needs of the organism and what they're trying to predict, but they can't quite predict at that point in time. So I bring this up to understand layers of simulations, meaning each holon is going to be representing the other ones through impressions based upon its past experience, and it's going to be giving kind of like a very fuzzy vision of those things. So when we talk about a simulation, are we talking about an individual simulation or a collective simulation? Are we talking about a biological simulation, a technological simulation, or a cultural one? Who is simulating who? So far with the brain, we've been talking about the upper right quadrant, the individual sort of simulation that we're going through in our own brain, the way we interpret things. Now it stands to reason that there's also a collective simulation. Our cultures are always interpreting things in terms of the individual experiences of its constituents, as well as the sort of impressions that it has based upon its own cultural understanding. We talked about biology, the brain. Then there's technology. You know, when we think of simulation, when you guys clicked on this talk to watch it, breaking out of the simulation, almost guaranteed you're thinking technological simulation. Most people. So there is a technological simulation that we think about, which is like, are we in a technological video game? Was this reality engineered? We think of like the Truman Show, that film, where Jim Carrey is being living in a simulation created by other people. So, and then there's cultural as well. So the idea of a simulation has a lot to do with, you know, the notion of conspiracy theories, because usually conspiracies are like two neatly ordered ideas about someone who's in control. But is there someone really in control? Or are these things just kind of naturally emergent based upon the limitations of our own mind? Okay, I'm gonna go on. So how many simulations are there? We already seen that each layer of our neural system is simulating, you know, perception, is simulating the reality it's capable of perceiving. We've already seen that each holon on the integral map is kind of simulating, you know, the one from its own perspective, simulating reality according to its own constraints. And the culture is simulating reality according to its own constraints. And the social, the lower right quadrant here, is simulating reality according to its own constraints, so on and so forth. So how many simulations are there? Well, potentially infinite. We are always basing things on imitations. And then, you know, there's many collectives, there's many individuals. So how many simulations are there? Somebody wrote in the comments, nobody is in control. That's it. Yeah, I remember that quote, Terence McKenna. He said, reality is simply too complex, right? There are, of course, like sort of mafias that kind of have control over certain things, but the tendency to see things as being controlled by certain individuals is kind of like the same tendency that we have to see like the face of a face on the moon or a face on a piece of toast and then sell it on eBay for like $1 million. I've talked about this in the first video on this series, which is the evolutionary origins of the singularity, which explains how we got here and how we project onto the environment our current mode of perception. So we are going to think that aliens are anthropomorphized, but you know, there may be aliens like that, but there also probably are more advanced aliens that we can only, you know, perceive psychically once we develop those capabilities ourselves. Okay, and even then, maybe not. So whose simulations are they? Are they us simulating things within ourselves? Are they just layers of our biology simulating things? Is there another civilization out there simulating something for us? That is certainly possible, but at the same time, that is a little bit of an easy explanation. Kind of like, yeah, there's something else out there creating a video game for ourselves. What that tells me that somebody said, oh, there's a metaphor we can all relate to, video games and computers. There's another thing we think about, aliens. There's a bias we have, anthropomorphism. We're going to combine those three things into a giant mashup, and then we're going to say that there's a video game simulation. It's very actually simplistic. It's kind of magical thinking, and it's kind of cool because it's creative. It's a stepping stone to think about other things. But is that the truth, the answer? I would tentatively hypothesize that it is actually just a the beginning of our ideation about a very complex subject. Thinking about simulations is the matrix. Is there, is there a reality greater than what we can perceive? Predictive processing tells us unequivocally, yes, there is a more complex reality. If anybody's ever been in a flotation tank, what you're doing there is kind of relaxing yourself enough, creating a soup of salt outside your body that is kind of equivalent to the soup of salt you have inside your neurons, allowing your neurons to basically not be able to grab onto any external information. So your neurons start hallucinating. And when you start hallucinating, you have nothing to grab onto. So you're kind of like in this permanent state of psychedelia while you're in the float tank. And that's a great environment to release traumas, to do different things if you feel comfortable. You can also practice meditation in a flotation tank and so on and so forth. But that's kind of an example of basically unhinged predictive processing. There's a constant stream of prediction error, meaning the things you predict would be there are no longer there. In fact, there's like a blank slate. And so what happens is your brain starts issuing predictions top down, right? All the way, kind of like in dreams as well. When you're dreaming, you don't have physical reality to constrain you. So your brain can willy-nilly predict things that don't go together. And in doing so, it kind of cross-fertilizes neural connections to build new possibilities. And in a sense, that is necessary. Try going without sleep for 3 days. Just kidding, don't try. But if you do, you may start hallucinating. And so it would be dangerous to drive or something like that, or to think clearly, because your brain needs to kind of diversify neural connections and prune the ones that don't make sense and be connected to your creativity always. Is anyone in control? Well, I think, again, that's a projection. I think that there may be, like I said, potentially, if you just follow the logical hypothesis, that there may be kind of alien technologies interacting with us psychically through the mind. Those do play an influence, but no more than our culture influences us, right? So we're influenced by our culture. Look down at the clothes you're wearing. That's part of culture. Listen, what music do you listen to? That's part of culture. The fact that you're even on this channel means culture influences you in some way because you found out about something outside of you called SingularityNET, and you're tapped into the live stream. So what this conversation is right now, this talk is part of culture. So is there a way out, so to speak? Well, so this talk is kind of like part one of breaking out of the simulation. I wanted to lay down the foundation for how this works. How do we simulate things? What is the neural mechanism underlying simulating the simulation process in and of itself? So yes, there is a way out of breaking out of your own simulation, and then through that, understanding how simulations work, through what I've explained here. In future talks, we're going to describe kind of how the brain constructs reality at a more detailed level, and how you can actually consciously break out of it through various mechanisms. The way out involves updating your perception and being attuned with fresh eyes to your perception. I tend to encourage being situated to get yourself exposed to complex systems such as nature that have been around for a very, very long time. It's not that nature is necessarily going to be more sophisticated than what an advanced singularity will look like. It's that the relationships in nature are a treasure trove of complexity, complex systems relationships that need to inform our artificial intelligence development, so that we can properly develop an advanced AGI and an advanced simulation, an advanced world for us to interact with, artificial intelligence world to interact with, a sufficiently advanced one that is taking into account all the things in nature. Right now, we barely understand how plants communicate with fungi, how plants communicate with each other, how the weather systems, are formed, at an experiential level, meaning you're not always attuned to those things. So go walk barefoot outside and, do some Qigong and breathe outside. As I discuss, I teach, courses on these kinds of things. Many others do as well. So, it's the information is out there. To break out of a simulation, you sort of need to do cultivation of energy, cultivation of emotions, become aware of your body, become aware of the constraints, which is what I've done today in this talk. You also need to expose yourself to more complex systems that allow you, inspire your brain to make new connections. So go out in nature. You need to also take perspectives. You need to take the perspective not only of yourself and others around you. Let's start with that. That's important. You know, have a good family relationship, have good social relationships. You know, take other people's perspective, still be able to be sovereign and set your boundaries and whatnot. Of course, just healthy dynamics. But beyond human relationships, also, you want to take the perspectives of ecological systems, of countries, of cultures, of planets, of the sun. What would it be like to look up at the world from the perspective of an ant colony, from the perspective of the sun? The sun probably doesn't even see you. It's not built to see you. It's built to basically, it's basically just giving off a ton of energy entropically. And it is sort of going to have an awareness of the gravitational pull of other planets, because that's acting on the sun, and the sun is acting on those planets. And those planets are acting on the Earth, and those planets are acting on our biology. Right? There are actually, in traditional Chinese medicine, for example, there are anatomies that have certain, say how certain vessels of consciousness are influenced by certain planets and phases of the moon. So I find it all the more hilarious, the idea of aliens being something that's exactly like us, because how much is our biology and our cognition, our consciousness shaped by the planets, shaped by these gravitational forces, by dark matter, and so on and so forth. So also I mentioned here subtle and causal anatomy. The simulations that we are enacting through predictive processing, the simulacra, the imitations of reality through past experience that we're constantly running online, is a, is based upon your consciousness kind of flying inside the G-forces of the orbit of different parts of your nervous system, so to speak, meaning you're kind of like taking for granted the experience that your nervous system is offering you. But there is a transcendent experience that is available if you go into your subtle anatomy, which is kind of going away from the field around the various nerve plexuses of your body and going in towards the central channel, which is kind of like the gravitational pull of a black hole that bends space-time. And there is a sort of transcendent aspect of consciousness there. And by that, I don't mean anything woo or necessarily mystical, or well, mystical, yes, but not necessarily supernatural in any way. It is simply a place in your subtle anatomy that is beyond time and space. It transcends those limitations of relativity. And so mixing that awareness with the relative awareness of the simulations themselves will help to disassemble the simulations. Okay. I'm going to take myself out of screen share so we can just kind of interact sort of more face-to-face, so to speak. But yeah, there's my website, neuralaxis.org, and Gabriel Axel on socials. So stick with me. We're going to do just some more Q&A type of stuff here. TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. Someone says, I studied that very aspect in TCM. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's present in Taoism, the fusion of the elements, 8 extraordinary vessels, it's called. Someone asked, can subliminals help? Yeah, subliminals can certainly help to influence perception, break you out of perception. So certain meditations, hypnosis, etc. You know, if you were to put this very talk like at a very low volume imperceptibly throughout your day, just a random example, not that you should do that or anything, what I'm saying will influence you to some degree. So whatever you take will influence you, whether it's music or lyrics or whatever. Someone says, I just want to get uploaded into a robot and fly into a black hole. Great. You could be the first one to do that and let us know how it goes. Would you live forever if you had the choice? Okay, so eternity, immortality, all these things are notions that are based upon the part of ourselves that intuitively knows that there is something that is eternal, something that is immortal within us and within experience. And think about, there's something that you learn over time as you cultivate energy and do qigong and things like that, and enough energy work in the right way, is that you realize that not only do you have your physical body, but you have a little virtual body inside yourself. A virtual body that is kind of an illusory body. It's kind of like a hallucination that is kind of living inside your awareness, and it's emerging from your central channel, the neural axis in the body. You, in a sense, have ancestral memory of all your evolution, of the fish that you once were, of the lizards or the reptiles that you once were before you became a bipedal and walked. So all these things are kind of deeply, deeply embedded in your evolutionary timeline. They're very faint, very, very, very faint. But you have virtual bodies that emerge. And if you concentrate in a certain way and you contemplate the environment as a trigger, you know, you can, in a sense, start to kind of use your empathy, your mirror neurons, to kind of start mimicking these things, and then things will emerge. So there is an eternal aspect of consciousness that transcends the body, that has to do, you know, the body is going to last a lifetime, right? But before that, you have these other lifetimes as, you know, more ancient forms of biology that are in your DNA and so on. There's this ancestral memory over the course of thousands of years, millions of years. And those things create a very faint impression of eternity, and they allow us to think of things like immortality. So the idea that we can become immortal is, in a sense, a projection onto the physical self of an intuitive knowledge that there is such thing as eternity. We may or may not live forever. We may or may not get to the point of immortality at a physical level, and not everyone will get there first, because the people that are wealthier will probably get there first. Because of the technology, right? To spend money on it. Those kinds of things, first recognize that is a projection. Then you can go on and pursue it if you want to, as an embellishment of consciousness, as an iteration, as something to dive into, you know, to have fun with. But first of all, recognize the impulse and where it comes from. The deep intuitive knowledge of transcendence of time, which is accessible through different meditation techniques, right? Someone asks, do you teach or participate in Qigong? Yes, I do. Go to my website, or there's a link posted at the bottom of this video. Ancestral memory, what a great term. I will have to learn more about this. Yeah, sure. There's a lot to this. You know, you could think about the term ancestral lives as kind of like the ancient memory of all the lives that have lived before you that are present in your DNA. So, and you know, the whole idea that we come from stardust, sure, it goes all the way back to then, and then everything in between now and back then, there is kind of like these fields that are present in our DNA and in our structures. You know, the physical body, in a sense, is also a bit of an illusion. You know, that all our cells are kind of reborn every 7 years or 10 years. So your body is a robot, someone says. Well, it's possible. So I wanna, if people are interested, I can kind of lead a short meditation, and we can go back to a few more questions if you want. So basically, we're just gonna kind of go into part of meditation is kind of what I talked about earlier about metacognition, is you kind of like zoom out and look at yourself. And the more you do that, the more you realize that what you're looking at is not the real you, and that allows you to kind of break out of simulacra. Okay, so we did a meditation last time. We'll do another one this time. So I invite everybody to close their eyes, sit up comfortably straight wherever you are, not forcefully straight, just whatever feels good for your spine, so you can focus without any discomfort. Take some deep breaths into the belly. Focus on your breath for a moment. Notice the breath going in and out, the belly expanding and contracting naturally. So now, with your eyes closed, you would normally be if you had your eyes open, you would be looking straight ahead of you at objects. So now with your eyes closed, kind of like bring your awareness to the very center of your brain. as if you were relaxing your eyes backwards along railroad tracks to the center of the brain, and kind of like lightly sort of just looking towards that center, as if you were trying to focus on the very center. This is the area between your brain hemispheres, the corpus callosum. That's it. So let go of ideas, thought forms, etc., and just kind of let them pass by in awareness as you draw awareness inwards there. Now I invite you to drop that awareness as if it was going down an elevator shaft, down into the area of your center of your chest, the thoracic area of your body. Almost as if you're looking out from the perspective of the region of the heart, the center of your chest. One-pointed, looking out from there. And let it kind of shine out like light from the sun, outward from that single point. Relaxing. Imagine a shining, brilliant light. You're looking out at the world from this perspective. Rather than looking out at the world from the perspective of your brain, you're looking at it from the perspective of this center here, the area of your body that's involved in embracing things and kind of connecting to more feelings of connection, embrace, love maybe. Whatever works for you. You can soften your face and maybe gently smile inwardly from this perspective. And then gently go backwards from the center of your chest towards the back of the chest. Bring your awareness to the kind of the back of the heart area, the center of the chest. And place your awareness one-pointedly, looking out from that singular point of light, singular point of awareness, perspective from the back of the heart. You can look at the front of your heart that way and then the whole world that way. So imagine that all your senses are coming from there. Imagine that you're kind of floating, or rather sinking. You're at the bottom of a pool looking upwards at all the diffracting and refracting light. It's kind of the feeling of being here. Still breathing in a relaxed manner. And now notice all of your perception. Notice the thoughts that come up. And let them pass. Let them resolve. Let them sort of entropically dissipate naturally. As you kind of relax like a floating jellyfish at the bottom of the pool looking upwards. Letting all of phenomena just resolve itself. So perceptions, feelings, thoughts, your worries, your anxieties, your ideas, your concepts. You can sort of just like let them naturally coast and dissipate. Like take your foot off the gas off the pedal, that keeps those concepts, those ideas, those emotions going. Just let them go. Let them be. You don't have to keep them going. And in this perspective, just relaxing and breathing, doing very little. Now drop your perspective from the heart area. Drop your perspective to the pelvis. So rather than looking at things from the perspective of the heart area, the chest, go down, bring your awareness down the elevator shaft into the pelvic region. And look out at the world from your pelvis. Be present inside your pelvis as if your senses were coming from there, as if you had a little mini you down there looking out at the world. Notice how that feels. Just notice the feelings. You may have thoughts coming up. Let the thoughts come and go like clouds. Feel the feeling of being there. Relaxing into it. Noticing that. Now go to your heart one last time. Bring your awareness back up the elevator shaft into your heart area. And look down at the world that you saw through your pelvis, so to speak. But look at it from the perspective of your chest, of your heart area. And then go to the back of the heart again, kind of receding back to the bottom of the pool, looking upwards. Looking at all of perception, including from the pelvis, from the perspective of your heart, but kind of receding a little bit to the back of the heart more. And then just open your eyes and relax and reintegrate perception while still kind of remaining relaxed and, at ease with your mind, with your body, etc. If you feel kind of spacey, just kind of tap your body a little bit with your hands or massage your hand, kind of rub yourself as if you're waking up, massage your face, massage your legs, etc. From top to bottom. So in a sense, what we're doing there is we're looking out at the world from different areas of our body axis. Not necessarily the neural axis, that I talked about in the pyramid with those raw senses and so on, but just the body axis itself, from the thoracic plexus, the cardiac plexus, this area, which has its own kind of way of sensing the area around it, okay? And the body is kind of a human hold-on, a metaphor for, a reflection of the world around it. In a sense, you have these more base layers, kind of the earth below you, and then up here you have kind of like more windy energy. Down below, you think about the base of the volcano. Then as you go into your belly and solar plexus, you get more like fiery, and it goes up and opens out of the volcano and kind of becomes air, right? This is air is kind of connection, right? Kind of like everything, the stuff inside the volcano became connected to the outside. So in a sense here, you're viewing things from a more connective perspective, a more embracing, and also a more free perspective, a more loving, perhaps compassionate, because when you look at things from the lower centers in your body, they tend to be more about survival and basic needs, like going to the bathroom and all that sort of stuff. So the world looking from that area is going to be a bit more about self-sustaining, self-survival. Whereas from here, there's kind of a bit more of a connection, understanding, kind of a more a feeling of liberating those constraints. So that's why we look at first from the heart, then we look down from the pelvis to see the difference. Then we look back from the heart, but through the pelvis, so to speak, And the back of the heart is kind of like this, the bottom of the pool is kind of like your higher self. It kind of helps you to see things from a place that's less involved in kind of like the way your ego personality, which we all have, the way your ego personality grips onto experience and keeps the cycles going and keeps driving them and uses energy to keep them going. From the back of the heart, you're more willing to kind of like let things kind of go and you float, right? So you're not dissociating. You don't want to dissociate. You want to be able to just look at things, be aware of them, interact and all that. At the same time, you're doing it from the perspective of this kind of more witnessing, kind of like soul level kind of thing going on. So I enjoyed that. Someone says, great. Thank you, James. So part of what we're doing here is going into our subtle anatomy, and our different deeper parts of our anatomy, different spaces in our body that we can use to see things differently. So one thing is that is deeply conditioning of the human mind is the notion of individualism, which is the kind of conditioned by the need to keep our body under survival, and also by the systems around us. We went in the quadrants, the integral quadrants. We saw the lower right, which is the social layer. Looking at things in terms of you got to look out for yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and work, and go make money. Kind of the capitalistic society we live in, competitive, etc., breeds a sort of individualistic view of the world. And so then, we think, oh, how can we be free from this? Well, okay, we can become more libertarian and so on and so forth. We espouse less control from external factors. We try to maximize the individual and just hope for the best and let it all go. And, then how do we all, no guarantee for the success of civilization necessarily, but at least we can look after ourselves. So there is something important about transcending individualism. Now, if you look at the holons in the integral map that we showed earlier, the molecule doesn't cut off the atom when it becomes a molecule. It transcends and includes it. So think about what are all the benefits of individual focus that individualism affords, right? Individualism as a unitary focus is constraining too much maybe, but being aware of your individual sovereignty, meaning understanding what are the boundaries between yourself and the influencing factors around you, creating like a healthy cell wall where you can decide what influences you and what doesn't, rather than saying, I reject all influence. Or on the opposite end, not being aware of influences and just letting yourself be like floating in the wind, right? You want like a balance. You want to have a healthy structure that what's yours and what's not yours, and you can take in, depending on the situation, how to clear things when they're no longer serving you. So that's the benefit of that layer of individualism. But we all know that we don't function individualistically. We actually function as a collective. And whether we realize it or not, it's kind of like gravity. It's there, it's operating. The collective has its own sort of mind, collective mind made up of the individuals and of the forces in aggregate from all those individuals. So take what's beneficial about individual awareness, and it's important at some point to breaking out of a simulation to see reality from the perspective of the many and the collective. And in a sense, from a feeling perspective, from the subjective experience, it's not just intellectual. Okay, well, now I got to think about other people. Okay, what do I do? Donate to a cause, help somebody. Yeah, all that stuff. Sure. That said, there's a more natural way that it can work. It's realizing that, living life only for yourself, meaning, well, let's assume you're taking care of yourself, right? That we're going to take that as a given when we're talking here, okay? We're not negating that. We're transcending it, including it. Now, if I live life only for myself, only looking out for myself, that is not a net benefit towards human consciousness as a whole. And the evolution, it is not beneficial for consciousness because consciousness is not only individual. Individuality is an illusion, ultimately, right? Consciousness, if we have virtual bodies and ancestral memory, we are more than individuals. The purpose of the individual is to take care of the vehicle of consciousness and then use it however we want to make consciousness better for all of existence. So beyond individualism, beyond the experience of doing things for yourself, is the experience of doing things for the benefit of consciousness as a whole. And that may include others. That may include the planet. That may include civilization, the cosmos, etc. So that is experienced at a deep level as compassion, right? Understanding that individuality is an illusion based upon layers of simulacra, right? Meaning every individual is projecting onto the present stuff based upon their past. And so am I. So is the other person there, you know, thinking, when you think I'm doing this, so is somebody else. They're doing it from their own perspective. So how can we be present with other people's stuff? Having clear boundaries for taking care of ourselves, not choosing to be involved in everything. At the same time, being compassionate towards the common human condition that we all share. And the common condition that all organisms, all complex systems share. All complex systems believe that they are the end-all be-all. The sun kind of sees things through his perspective. The ants see things through their perspective. The dog, the cat, the human, you know, so on and so forth. It's important at some point, once you have enough individual sovereignty, to be able to go into the realm of connection with sort of transcending personal perspective. It becomes easy to do this through practice, specifically through embodied practices where you're cultivating emotion cultivation. So to use my personal example, when I teach neurophysiological integration, right, there's a link below that, for example, in the talk description or on my website, or what I call CAP, K-A-P, which refers to Kundalini awakening and integration, which is, you know, it might sound kind of wooey, but there are other currents in the body that you can cultivate and grow. And what they do is they integrate the neural endocrine systems in a certain way, and experience and awareness is shifted. And it becomes easier to access and integrate and deal with and utilize these other capacities at will. It becomes easier to relate, to cognize, to think more deeply, to think about problems in certain ways, according to your own perspective and from where you're coming from. Everyone's going to be different. But there are ways to cultivate that ability to think from other perspectives, to relate to things compassionately while building on top, like a totem pole, on top of your own sustained, healthy sense of being an individual, a sovereign individual. And then beyond that, beyond the connection at the kind of like this level, there is the level of just pure space and time, and seeing things as complex systems, each having their own perspective. Then beyond that, there's a sense of seeing things as the mind of the universe operating non-locally all the time, and then the infinite kaleidoscope of consciousness. And there's a continuity between all of these centers in the body, centers inside your virtual body, a continuity between that in your present life and all the ancestral memories that you are stored in your biology. And these things ultimately are just going to sound like whatever if you haven't experienced them, but it is possible to train it. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. Just go train it and see what happens for you, and see how far you can take your own creativity, experience, etc. The way you will look at the idea of a simulation, the idea of a singularity, stands to change radically if these practices are under your belt. You will see that you're simulating things all the time. Other people are too, that the universe is simulating things, that there is a difference between reality and simulacra, that the singularity is just a technological singularity, is not the first singularity by any means. You can have singularities of experience. When each holon turns into a new one, meaning when prokaryotes were integrated into eukaryotes, they experience a singularity. And the universe at all levels it is experiencing, having some form of proto-experience. It would be violent to separate the material from the conscious. They are part and parcel of the same thing. The fact that we don't recognize that consensus, in science and all that, is just because we haven't gotten there yet, right? And that's fine. Science serves its purpose to bring us all into collective understanding and agreement on certain things. Having said that, through practice, you can start to kind of taste how these things might be possible and just take creative license to see how they benefit your lives and the lives of those around you. So just back to the questions here. It's fascinating how this is displayed in math, art, and in nature. Yes, yeah, these are things that are holographically imprinted into sort of the nature of consciousness in the universe. And it is incredibly empowering to see experience, first-person experience, as a virtual readout of brain. And so therefore, you could argue that, learning about the brain and learning about what each brain region does is cool. It teaches us about our experience, and that's where it's useful. But just learning about it just to learn about it, isn't as useful as you learn about the brain, seeing how that relates to your experience. And seeing experience as a pure virtual readout of material reality. So when, I don't see things in a dualistic way, Cartesian dualism. That is, it's not that there's a cutoff, there is literally, for every neural kind of configuration, neurobiological configuration, there is a corresponding experiential configuration. And for every single position where the planets are in affecting Earth, there's a unique configuration for the planet as well. We're always living in little moments of mini singularities, of the unique moments all the time. And we can attune to that however we want. We can draw it in and let it kind of feed through us and then breathe it back out kind of thing. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience. Being alive is the virtual reality of the universe. The fact that you're here to look out through your own eyes, you are a singularity of the universe. You are the ultimate technology. Now, humans are so awesome that we're here building even more technologies. We're going even further. I mean, how badass are we? So, what's your thought on Gaia? Hold on, before I answer that, will this stream be rewatchable on YouTube? Yes, it will. Stay on the SingularityNET channel. What are your thoughts on Gaia? Yeah, Gaia is basically kind of like the sort of the consciousness that's a result of the material reality of the Earth. So the prokaryotes, the eukaryotes, and all those things put together, the ecosystems, there is a complex system, and every complex system has a conscious correlate. It's like a proto-consciousness. Not panpsychist in the sense that we project, oh, they must have some experience like us. No, I call it pan-experientialism, like Heidegger called it. Sorry, Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead, if I recall correctly. So panpsychism and pan-experientialism have similarities, but panpsychism, it tends to have this idea that everything has a psyche that's like a human psyche. And again, that's maybe that's just one version of panpsychism, but it's the most common one. I mean, and the human mind, when they're exposed to the idea of panpsychism, oh yeah, of course, okay, everything's consciousness. But there is a tendency to say, oh, things are conscious in the human sense. And that's kind of the same fallacy as projecting human anthropomorphic bias onto aliens. When in all likelihood, advanced aliens are not operating like humans, they're operating in a far more advanced way, transdimensionally, wormholing into our minds and all sorts of things, if we allow them. So there's that. But pan-experientialism means that, even Gaia has a mind of her own. It's not that she has an identity or a human-like perspective, or that she's like a goddess or whatever. All those interpretations are human interpretations. If you want to attune and know what Gaia is, so anyone who doesn't know, Gaia is kind of like the Earth without human civilization on it. Like just the green and the brown. Think about it like that. Green and brown and blue is Gaia, and white with the clouds. So if you want to know Gaia, attune to the Earth element, connect with the Earth, all that sort of stuff, and just feel it and see what it feels like. See what it feels like to kind of merge your mind with that as an experiment. So let's see. Someone says, it's encouraging to see a young cat so versed in the multiple aspects of this complex assemblage beyond the reductionist or partial perspectives typical of Anglo-American neuroscience. Well, yeah, I mean, sure, I appreciate that, and I think that all of us here, have an inclination towards these kind of things. When I started researching consciousness, I was looking in a lab at DNA and pipetting it, sequencing genes and different people and animals and so on. And I thought, well, I need to study this at the level of consciousness. Is two sides of the same coin, but looking at it from the external side is not going to get you to the internal. It's just going to you're beating around the bush. You can do both, just be aware that there's a deeper layer. In my first talk on the series, or Evolutionary Origins of the Singularity, I explain how the drive to create technology is actually a drive to create, to self-replicate ourselves externally in the form of a synthetic artificial consciousness. Let's see. Is it like someone's asking, is it like self-assembly consciousness that's aware and then is kind of thought of as part of nature? I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but it reminds me of the idea of emergent things being emergent. That the consciousness is kind of emerging constantly based upon the underlying material substrate. So whenever someone comes at me and says, this is this stuff is just kind of unbased in science and stuff, I'm like, well, look, philosophically, it stands to reason, if you reason far enough and you take into account anthropomorphic bias, that humans are not the only things that are conscious. If we really are just material, biological material, then of course, if it stands to reason that biological material in general, or just complex systems, have increased informational complexity, and that informational complexity interacts with itself in a way, and if that information complexity is all operating on the free energy principle, as Carl Friston kind of points to, meaning they're trying to maintain homeostasis, increase survival, there is a system that sees itself as separate from the environment. It would just stand to reason that there's a proto experience of that thing, non-human-like, but just a very basic form of experience, meaning it feels like something to be a cell. You poke it, it gets irritated. That cell must have an experience of that. It just doesn't make sense for there to not to be that. So if, meaning it takes more effort to think that it doesn't have experience. It's an artificial separation, So things are just more parsimonious if you take into account consciousness. And so, and again, a proto-consciousness, not shrouded in anthropomorphic bias. If you do that, then it becomes more likely that the universe is kind of like, kindled with some kind of proto-awareness, and that all material has awareness. And so, what I'm talking about here in consciousness is not some form of idealism that's separated from matter. It's not this unscientific thing. It's actually saying the scientific stuff we study has a dimension in experience. And I'm just promoting that we can map this. This is mappable. You want to know Gaia? You dive in, you contemplate Gaia. You want to know the sun? You contemplate the sun without looking directly at it, for the most part. You want to understand, you want to see what the moon might feel like? Contemplate the moon. Relax your awareness and breathe it in and just kind of let yourself kind of be in relationship with it. You're still going to be interpreting from your lens, but you can get closer and closer and closer to shedding away those biases. The tree as well. Yes, it's a very good idea to do meditation and stuff around trees. Trees increase alpha waves in the brain and all sorts of interesting stuff. Yeah, trees are definitely have their own field of awareness, and you can sort of feel it but you first have to kind of open. Some people will feel the tree first and then realize they're interested in cultivating consciousness in themselves. Other people have to open it first in themselves, and then they can feel those things. So it's kind of a chicken egg situation. You can't write it off just because you don't feel it right away. Someone asked, emergent on the basis of conscious nature. Yeah, that was a clarification to the previous question. Yeah, I think I spoke about it a little bit. I hope I did. Someone asked, any insights on enlightenment and psychosis? There are similarities and the difficulties of integrating enlightenment in today's society. Yes, the first thing that comes, there are similarities. but there are differences, and they are different. And I want to speak to that because there's sometimes this equivalence that's displayed between like schizophrenia and shamanism and stuff like that. There may be some shared underlying components with both, right? But they're not the same thing. And it's important to not lead ourselves into thinking psychosis is enlightenment, because you might be, there's a difference. Like think about psychology as personal psychology and transpersonal psychology. You want to have a healthy ego personality, because that's a part of the way you interact with life. That's part of life. That's going to form kind of a foundation for how you interpret and correct simulacra and interpret the spiritual realm. So you want a healthy ego personality. And that means you don't want psychosis. That means you don't want, too much depression. You don't want too much bipolar kind of tendencies, anxiety and all sorts of stuff like that. But, things that, it's a spectrum, right? Now, of course, psychiatry is going to have a specific way of dealing with psychosis. And maybe someone who's maybe, it's again, predictive processing. Someone if you're a hammer, you see the world as a nail. So if you go to a psychiatrist, they're going to, unless a psychiatrist has had non-ordinary experiences him or herself, you can tell the difference between psychosis and maybe some other non-ordinary experience. That person will see you as a nail and say, well, look, you're having psychosis, so yeah, take this. All that being said, the test for psychosis is not going to overfit for non-ordinary phenomena all the time. But a lot of it has to do with, are you being a healthy, effective agent to yourself? Are you posing a danger to yourself and others? Those are questions, for the medical and psychological establishment to kind of deal with. What I'm saying here is that there are some similarities, there are some differences, but please do not confuse the two, because you do want a healthy personality. You do want a healthy life to be able to expand properly. And I do know, I hate to pick on all of us here a little bit, but I do notice in the singularitarian community, there is an over-eager desire to transcend the human condition. That is itself a limitation, and that will limit the quality of the singularity that you can hope for and be capable of experiencing. You want to dive into your constraints and understand your constraints and work from the sort of possibilities within them. Understand what the world looks like from here, for example, just to use the example we did, the world from the pelvis, the world from the sun. Take perspectives. You need a healthy psychology. You don't want to be mired in psychosis. You don't want to overly transcend yourself, because then what you will do is kind of like ignore your own limb, and it'll become flaccid. It'll become like it'll atrophy. You need to interact in the world. So cultivate both. You can have it all. Just do it all. Cultivate a healthy ego personality. Cultivate non-ordinary states. Do them in an integrated way and be grounded. You'll be more effective that way. Do you think more people are experiencing visual phenomena, streaks of light, wave spots? So many factors that go into that. It's so many factors. It's hard to even know where to begin with that. That depends. Depends on the influence of the solar flares and things like that. Potentially, some people have said that. I'm certainly not surprised that's the case. I would say you don't want to be in a position where you have to think about too much what's influencing you to do something. You want to be able to have enough understanding and management of your own abilities to be able to know that if it does happen to you, you can course correct internally, endogenously. So that means don't worry too much about what's causing things on the outside, but rather learn to cause them from within yourself. It's a question of where you draw the line. I consider someone drinking Coca-Cola as a danger to themselves. There's a very big difference between that and psychosis. Although I definitely sympathize with your sentiment, because I don't drink Coca-Cola. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see, a lot of great questions here, just kind of scrolling fast. One foot in both worlds. Yes. I'm so glad you're talking about psychosis. Yes. Yeah. Psychosis is not something to view negatively. It is something you just have to be aware of and manage if it's happening to you, or if you're having anxiety, if you're having depression. Understand these things are depression might be kind of your own mind telling you that something needs to change. You're you're stuck in the same old thing. So how can you change things in a way that's beneficial to you? A little bit more of questions, and otherwise we'll bring it to a wrap. Someone says, I got into crypto because capitalism promotes mass fractured egos that can be shaped for profit. Yeah, cryptocurrency. The idea of decentralization is a attractor for many people. So, and I bring this up in previous talks, is that, back to our topic, is that it's beneficial to have some form of altruistic intent while being grounded in your own, individual centeredness, sovereignty, etc. That stands to help humanity and the world quite a bit. And look out at the world through, as much as you can through this perspective. And, wish well upon yourself and unearth, pick up every stone in your mind, unearth the simulacra that you're running in the background habitually. It's just predictive processing. It's just neural mechanisms. We have constraints, they help us to not get burned. They help us to not touch the stove more than once. When you're a kid, you touch the stove, you get burned, you learn, you usually don't repeat it again. I would say, that's where those things are good for, the learning based on past experiences. But keep expanding, keep going, and really ask yourself, it's not just about dropping acid, it's really a lot about deliberate, disciplined cultivation of energy and doing things that, that help you expand your perspective and integrate that and become useful to people around you. Where are we? Somebody asked, where are we on AI now? Are they like conscious or more like blah, blah? Yeah, I don't think AI is, conscious in a deep way yet, but in a sense, there's consciousness in all matter. So, maybe the matter inside a robot is conscious, but we have a long way to go. And I think the more you cultivate non-ordinary abilities, the higher the bar will be that you'll set for AI. It's like, oh, AI is not truly conscious yet. It doesn't understand love and spirituality, so it can't be conscious. Can AI shut down airports, or are they helpful in predicting earthquake? I don't think we're at that point yet. It's important to not see AI as a conscious thing. AI is a machine learning categorization algorithm. And there are other forms of AI too, as Ben Goertzel talks about. AI is not automatically conscious, a conscious entity, a conscious self. That is a human projection. Watch the first presentation in my series, the evolutionary origins of the singularity. You'll see how we project personhood onto things, and it's important to see things more objectively than that. Thanks, Gabriel. Awesome lessons and good introspective thoughts. Much appreciated. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Thanks so much for doing this talk. Yep, absolutely. It's really a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great time. Certainly available. You can always contact me. The information should be on the bottom of this video if you want to learn more. That's always possible. We will do future talks on breaking out of the simulation, kind of at least related to that theme, because we're just kind of touching the base here. But there are many, many ways that we can do this. We'll go into some more meditations, and it doesn't have to be all these, new agey, soft, watery meditations. It could really just be very focused, very specific kind of things that we can explore. I was going to say something else. Yeah, thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to talk, to be here with all of you, and may you have a wonderful day. I'm looking forward to more talks. So thank you so much. Have a great one.